You are listening to Be Positive Speaks Radio Ministry. I'm your host, Melanie Carter, and today's topic is balancing grace. But first, I want to ask you, have you ever wondered how the Proverbs 31 woman did it all? Or how the faithful servant multiplied his 5 bags and made 10 more in Matthew 25? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Our special guest host is Jennifer N Brantley Esquire. Jennifer wears many hats. She is the granddaughter of a pastor, daughter of a minister of music, and a chaplain's wife. But she's also so much more than that, and believes you are too. Career-wise, she's an entrepreneur and attorney. Although she started her career as a crisis communication and public relations consultant in Atlanta, Georgia, she's worked for law firms in the federal sector as deputy director at a Nebraska state agency, and has been a member of a command staff for a California police department. But none of these roles ever found her far from her passion, helping others find their voice, connect to and live in their purpose, and tell stories in order to help others. When she married her husband, Chaplain Matthew Brantley, in 2017, their journey together into military life helped her to channel her love for helping others into a ministry of her own, More Than a Missus. What started as a blog to guide new and veteran military spouses eventually turned into a podcast, social club at Royal Air Force Mildenhall, and led her to create the Find Me mobile app, the only mobile app designed to connect minority military spouses to businesses that welcome their presence and their dollars with each PCS. She's written a book about self-love for children called Nina Barina Loves Her Hair, and created a Bible-based positive affirmation deck called Victory. Self-love, finding your purpose, self-branding, and victory over imposter syndrome are her favorite speaking topics of choice. Her work, which she has felt God-led to do, has been featured on Spotify, in BuzzFeed, Black Enterprise, and Military Family magazine. But she feels her greatest accomplishments are the connections the Lord allows her to make with real people every day. Jennifer, welcome to Be Positive Speaks. How are you?
Thank you so much, Mel. I am well. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm so excited to have you on. You've been a longtime friend, I would say. It's been over 5 years almost, right?
Mhm. It has. Yeah.
So I really just wanted to get into the many hats that you wear. And I wanted to first ask you, what is the motivation behind you having your hands invested in so many things?
Well, first, Mel, I want to give you your flowers and tell you that I am so proud of this endeavor that you've taken. You have a voice made for radio and you made me sound really good. So thank you. But in terms of my motivation, God said for us to be fruitful and multiply. And a lot of people have taken that, literally as it's meant to be in terms of creation. But I've taken it as an overall mandate for us Christians, and that's to bring others to God, to bring others close to Him, and to help them have fellowship with Him, and to equip them to do the same. So, my thought process behind the things that I do is just really a desire and a passion for helping people and to fulfill my God, what I feel and have taken a lot of work to realize is my God given purpose, which is to help others, to give a voice to others. I felt stifled in the past, and I never want anyone else to feel that they are not heard or that they are not important, which is why a lot of what I do focuses on positive affirmations and speaking life into yourself, and just having faith that you matter and that you were put where you are on this earth for a reason.
What led you to find your purpose?
It kind of like what I just said. I was very shy growing up. I felt that I had a lot of talents. I had a penchant for a lot of different things. So, kind of like a MacGyver, I felt that I was good at a lot of different things, but I didn't really know what I needed to channel them into which led to me at a young age, doing the speech contest and just trying to kind of figure out what am I meant to do with these gifts that I have been so graciously given. So it really just stemmed from that, from personal experience. I feel that a lot of people who embark on endeavors use their personal experience and build upon it, because once you've kind of grown and gotten past it yourself, you never want anyone else to go through what you've gone through if you can help them.
Wow. I mean, it's really that simple. I love that you share that with us. And I'm curious to find out, what do you think is the critical downfall of multiplying or trying to be a multiplier and be, like you've described, a MacGyver, having your hands in different places?
I think that can be twofold. So it's good to have your hand in a lot of places, and it's also a dangerous thing, because if you spread yourself too thin, then are you truly being effective? Are you truly exercising the gifts in the way that they're meant to be exercised? So there's that piece of it. Am I doing too much? My husband likes to say, when people say, "Oh, is Jennifer doing this now?" Yeah, she does too much, and he says it jokingly, but it can be to our detriment. And so we have to learn to kind of balance the things that we want to do versus the things that we're actually meant to do. So that's one. Another one is thinking that you are solely responsible for being a multiplier and for multiplying. So for me, that means maybe I have a difficulty relinquishing control and asking for help when I need it. But I think that if you truly want to be successful at being a multiplier, bringing others to Christ, fulfilling your purpose, then you have to realize that you cannot do it all. You have to have help. You have God as your help as well, and God also places people in our lives who are equipped to do things that maybe we don't have a talent for, maybe we do have a talent for, but we need to let it go and let somebody else, help us out with it so that we can do something else. So I think that's another thing. And then a third thing is realizing that everything will not be successful. So every endeavor will not be successful, and just knowing that that's going to happen. There's no escaping it, and learning to not really take those failures personally or as an affront to yourself, but more so as a lesson, as a learning lesson, so that you can do better, and be better, so that you can learn from your challenges and then use your learning experience to, in turn, still help other people.
I love that you share that. It's like you everybody has a plate, right? And what's on your plate, you either eat it, you consume it, or you take it off your plate. But if you want something else added to your plate, you got to make some room somewhere, right?
I love
And
that.
yeah, you got to be able to have that spirit of humility. I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to this is I love that you said understanding that you're not in control, that you need other people, and that you every failure isn't a true failure. It's more like a lesson learned. There is a song by an artist, I'm not sure of her name, but in her lyrics she says, "I take L's, yeah, give me a lesson." And I love that she shares that, because when we think of L's, we think of losses. You're losing, but when you lose, you really gain something. You gain knowledge, and I love that you put that as a as a statement in this um, way of managing. And so I'm curious if we could talk a little bit more about processes, because some people struggle with processes. So could you give me a typical rundown of what your process of managing your podcast, your book, your mobile app, your selling your victory cards, and being a wife and an attorney? What does that process look like for Jennifer N Brantley Esquire?
Yeah, so I will say one thing I have learned is that everything has a season. So you've named a lot of things that I've done and then a lot of projects that I've overtaken. And in the process of doing those things, like I said, I mentioned doing too much. I realize that sometimes I can take on too much and I can find myself feeling overwhelmed. And so, like I had my podcast, I had the Discarded podcast, and realize, in the process of prioritizing, so that's one piece of my process, is what takes precedence, what's most important right now, and realizing that that can change. So my list is I can't think of the word. It's evergreen, which means that it's living. It can change at any time. So I like to sit down and I, just think to myself and reflect, well, what's important to me right now? And of course, family is always at the top because I always say, and I think it's probably kind of a cliche, is that, with work, you're replaceable. With your own projects, I mean, yes, you have a purpose. There's a reason you wanted to do these things, but if you don't accomplish them, what really happens? What negative thing happens? But if you let your family fall to the wayside, you're not replaceable when it comes to your family. And if you fail to give them the proper care, then everything else doesn't really matter because you'll be miserable. So, first, prioritizing. Then two, which I actually said first, is realizing that some things have a season. So I had the podcast. I have taken a break from my podcast just because I did not have time. I started in the midst of the pandemic when I had an excess amount of time. I was working from home, child, and doing my podcast at the same time because I had extra time. But yeah, that's really kind of it. I keep lists. I'm a list person. So I have lists on my cell phone. I have lists that are written down just to kind of make me feel accomplished when I can cross something off. When it comes to work, like I said, you're replaceable with work. So that was a lesson. I'm now 37 years old that I really think I've only just learned in the past year or two, where I've truly established boundaries with work. And my husband would probably laugh if he if he heard me say that. But with my 9 to 5, at least I will say I've established boundaries. I do not take calls after hours. When I walk out of that door, I'm done. My current job, they'll text me, they'll send texts early in the morning at 6 a.m. Jennifer's not answering because Jennifer starts at 7:30 and I'm not in the office yet. And once I get there, I respond. And I've learned that people learn your boundaries. You don't even have to necessarily say them exactly what they are, but by your actions, you can show them. And so they know if you text Jennifer after 4:30, 5 o'clock when she's left or before a certain time, you will not get a response. So I'm very careful about my boundaries as well, and I very much stick to them, which is also helpful. So I think that's really part of my process. The process itself is evergreen. It can change. So you need to constantly assess, well, is this process is how, I once planned to juggle everything. Does that still work for where I am in my life right now?
I love that you use the term evergreen because it says that, hey, there's a project that comes to your mind, write it down, prioritize it. If it's the season for it, go for it. If it's not the season for it, it still lives on. You still have time to come back for it when the season is right. And so that means that no project is off limits. It's just every project has a season. And so you can be a multiplier, but you got to know what season you're in. And I
Yes.
love that term. That evergreen,
Yes.
that is gonna be in my vocabulary now. Evergreen. I love that. Oh my goodness. I only thought of that as a color. I didn't know that it was you have taught me something today. I
Mhm.
absolutely love that. One of the things you discussed was about making lists and writing stuff down. And I've learned to do that as well. I've got a planner, I've got a different notebook for each project, journal, diary, and then, hey, I got my notebook and things like that. One of the things I want to talk about is over analytical person. Would you consider yourself over analytical? So am I. And so I want to ask you, what is your advice to an over analytical person who always wants to be as accomplished as you are now?
Ooh, am I analytical? Absolutely. So I think it's easy, but also one of the most frustrating things is to tell someone just don't. Like to just don't think so much because how does that work? How is that a solution for me? So
Yeah.
that's one thing that I would never say is, just don't overthink. However, at some point you have to take the leap. At some point you have to step off of the cliff and just go for it because you can only plan so much. and going back to relinquishing control and realizing that ultimately we are not the ones in control. God is. So no matter how much we plan, He can uproot our plans and put us in a completely different direction. But if you never take that step, you will never know, if indeed this is something that you are meant to do. And you never give God the opportunity to catch you and to make it successful. You never give Him the chance to save you. You don't truly exercise your faith and your trust in Him. Faith is more than just a belief. It's an action. It takes actively trusting in God that He will catch you and that He will make sure that you're on the right path. And if you're going and veering in the wrong direction, He will steer you back where you need to be. And so for those of us who are extremely analytical, we have to do some self-reflection and say, okay, am I truly trusting in God and His plan for my life? Because why am I overthinking this? One analogy that I used when speaking over the weekend is I talked about, worry and faith. And I said something like, if you truly exercise your faith, if you truly give things over to God, then you'll be just like Jesus in the boat. He was fast asleep and before the disciples woke him up and said, save us. But He had already done it. He had already saved them. It was going to happen. They didn't have to wake him up. They didn't have to fear. And yet they did. And so my thing with that is, why are we fearful? What are we overthinking? How is that going to serve us? Save to put us in a holding pattern where we never accomplish anything because we're too busy thinking about it.
I love that you brought up that story with Jesus in the boat with the disciples, because I've come to a revelation that when you keep your focus on God, the storm will pass. But the thing about God is He'll teach you how to endure in the storm. He'll teach you how to keep your peace in the storm. The storm is supposed to happen. It's necessary for you, because we know our scripture tells us that endurance builds perseverance and perseverance builds character. And so when you keep pushing on past the hard stuff, you get to the other side and see that yes, it was hard, but I could do it. And
Absolutely.
that has a lot to do with our mentality, because our eyes can only see what's in front of us. Our eyes can never see further. And so we rely so much on our eyesight, but we never have just the safety or rely on the understanding of what's going on truly around us. Sometimes we can't even see past our situation. And so I love
Mhm.
that you brought that up, because as over analytical, most over analytical people, they tend to look at what's in front of them, and that stops them because they're like, okay, how am I going to do this? I've ran into this roadblock and I don't know how to get around it. And because I don't know how to get around it, now I cannot complete what I've got to do. Which brings me to the Proverbs 31 woman. How does she do it all, Jennifer? How does she have a business? She has employees. They take care of her household. Why is her light still on in the evening past, in the night? She's perceived as a merchant, right? She knows how to buy good merchandise. She knows how to trade and sell. She makes her own bed linens. She takes care of her household. She's a social light in the community. They know her husband. Her children call her blessed. Like, how does she do it? What is she doing that seems impossible? The thing about the Proverbs 31 woman, some people will be led to believe that this woman is absolutely impossible. There's no way you can have your hand in so many things. But I think that that's not true. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, reading Proverbs 31, it can seem overwhelming. It does seem like a lot. It seems like almost as though this woman is the epitome of perfection. And so it can definitely be daunting. And I think, again, it all boils down to faith and trust and knowing that, we are not perfect. We are comprised of flesh. So even with us being children of God and being saved, I honestly don't think that there is any way to attain perfection. However, it gives us something to strive towards. It gives us a model to emulate. It's a wonderful example of being a multiplier and having all the things. And it shows you, if you struggle with something like imposter syndrome, that it is possible. If God says it's possible, if it's in the scripture, if it's in the word, then it is so. And so, we can do it. It's a difficult thing. We will never be perfect. We will never have it down just right. And I think allowing ourselves to have that grace and acknowledge that we are human at the end of the day, and God knows that. He knows who we are. He knows what our failures are. He knows our weaknesses. He knows our strengths, and He will give us the ability to play up our strengths and to conquer our weaknesses so that we can be who He has called us to be.
I love that you brought up that grace and how God allows us the ability. And I'm curious to know. I'm super curious on this episode, but I really want to know, how are we supposed to view grace? Because the thing about it is, some people view grace as an opportunity to do what they want. But how are we
Mm.
supposed to view grace and operate in the gift of grace?
Yeah. Well, grace is a gift. It is an unearned gift. So it is something given to us by God because He cares so much for us. But while it is not something that we can earn, that does not give us carte blanche to do whatever we want to do, um, particularly as Christians, I think it more so says God understands that we are human. He knows that we are made of flesh. He created us. And so when we do falter, when we do fall, when we do backslide or do things that do not, comport with being a Christian, we know that we have His forgiveness. But we don't intentionally go out and do things that would, not exemplify what it means to be a kingdom child. It doesn't mean that we intentionally go out and, we know that there are laws. We know that, we can be forgiven for certain offenses, but we don't intentionally go out and break them. And it's the same. It's the same as Christians. We have grace, we're grateful for it. And then we also need to be able to extend that same grace to others, knowing that Christ first extended grace to us. And so I think it's twofold in that way. So acknowledging that we have a responsibility to live out a life that is true and that exemplifies what it means to be a Christian, but also to live that life by extending the same courtesy to other people when they fail us or when they don't live up to our expectations.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of hard because there's this like seemingly rigid scripture, Matthew 25, and it seems harsh in it. In Matthew 25 there are three servants. And these servants, their master gives them each bags of money according to their capabilities. And he leaves. He goes out of town and he says, "Hey, you're responsible for these bags of money." And so then when he comes back, he's grading them now. He's examining them. What have you done? So the first servant, he multiplied his 5 bags and made 10. The second servant multiplied his bags and made more. He only had 2, now he has 4. But the third servant buried his bag of money, and he was called wicked and perverse. But the first one was called faithful. And, it's just curious to find out why. Here's that word again, curious. But why is God so um focused on multiplying? And it's not just about money. Stewardship is about relationships, gifts, talents, like we've been talking about. Why is God focused on that?
Yeah, because that is His mission. So His mission is that we bring others to Christ so that they don't have to suffer eternal damnation. That's why it's so important. And, you brought up
Amen.
gifts and talents. And, I think it's interesting with this parable that another word for coins is talent. And one of my favorite verses is Matthew 5:16 that says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify thy Father which is in heaven." And to me, when I read this parable or when I think of this parable, It's an example of God telling us not to bury our talents and not to bury and squander our gifts that He has given us. Um, to use them to for his glory and to bring people closer to him. So that's the way that I look at it. The Matthew talks about hiding your light and how you should not hide your light. And in this verse, we basically see this servant is given this gift. He's given a bag of gold by his master, and he goes and he buries it. And this master is gone for a significant amount of time. So it's no wonder when he comes back and says, basically, well, what have you done? The servant's answer was nothing. And so, yes, the master's response was, can be perceived as harsh, calling him worthless. I don't think God is so harsh, but I think that this was more so to highlight to us that we should not hide our gifts, that we should use them, to accomplish God's purpose, and to be multipliers of men. And so that's really how I interpret that scripture. That's how I take it. And I just love that's actually one of my favorite parables. So I was excited when you brought it up. But it's for that very reason and because of the comparison that I think there is to Matthew 5:16.
I love that. We're about to come to a close, but one of the last questions I wanted to ask you was, how does one begin to be a multiplier? How would they
Mm.
begin? Where would they start? If they wanted to be obedient to God's command and multiply, where would they start? You mentioned that you were once shy, um, and now, but you tried your hand at many things, and so how do we encourage people to come out of their shyness if they're shy, or their confusion of what they should do? Like, where would one begin?
So I will say I'm still shy. The only time that I am not is when I'm on a stage, which is very weird. I don't know why. When I'm on a stage, it just does not matter. I, have no worries at all. But I think that, if you are a shy person, that can actually be an advantage because you should start by being still. You should start by being still and listening to God's voice because you have to first figure out what is his plan for your life. What gifts has he given you? A lot of people struggle, especially for women. That's one of the things that we often think about. Well, what is my purpose? Why was I put here on this earth? But in order to figure that out, in order to start being a multiplier, you have to first listen to the voice of God. And so that entails being still. It entails self-reflection. It entails, putting your nose and your eyes into the scripture and studying the word to figure out, well, God, what is God communicating to me? What does God desire of me? How can I be obedient to him? How can I fulfill, what is he telling me to do and how can I fulfill it? So I would say, start there, start with being still, listening to his voice, figuring out what your gifts are. Um, and, trying your hand at just different things. You don't have to start off big. Uh, you also mentioned, before we started this, but just in conversation, is getting rid of our desire to put ourselves on the pedestal, being humble and approaching it from the correct place. So, and that's something that I have also struggled with is, making sure that I don't want to do this because I desire fame or because I want to be an influencer. I had to get off of Instagram for a while because I was struggling. I was trying to get followers for what? Why? Why was I struggling comparing my already green grass to somebody else's and what they were doing? What they were doing is clearly not meant for me, at least not now. So I really think that's it. Figuring out what season you're in, really just being still and thinking and reflecting and knowing that the process itself will not be an easy one, and that it's not linear. You'll have your ups and you'll have your downs. Some days it'll seem easy peasy, and some days it will be a struggle. Some days you will feel like, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, and some days you'll feel super self-critical. It's not a linear process. If it was easy, it would not be worth it, and you would not have a story to tell. You would not have a testimony to share with other people. And then you could not be a multiplier because what would you have to tell other people to bring them closer to the Lord. So, yep, that's the advice that I would give to someone looking to start the process of being a multiplier.
Well, you heard it here on Be Positive Speaks Radio Ministry first from Jennifer N Brantley. So, this was an absolute powerful message. And I want to do this again. I want to, be able to come back on this radio show and we talk more about how to balance grace. One of the things I didn't get to do was mention the phrase of balancing grace together. Um, it's an operating in divine favor given by multiplying one's gifts, talents, and works, thus being faithful to God's command and living up to the responsibilities given. And in order to do these things, one must have emotional and mental fortitude, allowing all projects to receive equal attention for the sake of production and perseverance. And as Jennifer has already said, everything has a season. Everything has a time. It's not linear. It goes up and down. But if you want to learn more about our beautiful and talented lawyer that we have on today, Jennifer N. Brantley, Esquire, I can't forget the Esquire, you can follow her at Fire Esquire or at the Discarded Podcast to learn more about her podcast. You can also follow her at MTM Public Relations. If you want to buy her book, Nina Barina Loves Her Hair, which my 2-year-old loves this book, you can find it at shopmorethanamisses.com. That's shopmorethanamisses.com. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time. We absolutely loved having you on. We learned so much, and I pray that all of the viewers who are listening apply what they have learned today and become multipliers for the name of the Lord. This has been Be Positive Speaks Radio Ministry. I'm your host, Melanie Carter. Talk to you later.